Good evening. I'm Dan Jennings, and this is your Blue Wave Report for January 30th, 2019. As always, we start with our election watch. In Connecticut, February 5th is the deadline for nominating petitions to be filed for the May 6th elections. Lovettsville, Virginia, you have an election for town council on February 5th. And in Minnesota, State Senate District 11, you have a special election coming up on February 5th. In Indiana, February 8th is the deadline to file a declaration of candidacy in local elections where the town's population is over 3,500. Now on to our legislative watch. Tonight we will start with voting rights issues in the news. Thank you to @TokyoSand on Twitter for this information. An Arizona State Senate Committee has advanced SB 1046, 1054, and 1072, bills aimed at restricting how absentee ballots could be returned and to also put in place more voter ID rules. In New York, Governor Cuomo has now signed into law bills that institute a 10-day early voting period, pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds, and consolidates the primaries so no longer are there separate state and federal primaries. Kudos to New York State on bringing these laws about. In Colorado, Senator Mike Foot's bill would have Colorado join the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. It would replace the Electoral College once enough states to reach 270 electoral votes sign on. The compact currently sits at 172 electors. The bill now goes on to the Democratic-controlled House. The Wyoming House of Representatives, however, will debate a bill that would require voters to present photo identification at the polls. Sponsored by Casper Republican Chuck Gray, House Bill 192 seeks to prevent voter fraud in Wyoming. The bill passed a legislative committee Tuesday even after a representative from the Secretary of State's office told lawmakers she was unaware of any recent reported cases of voter fraud in Wyoming. In addition to requiring identification to verify one's identity at the polls, the legislation also grants the authority to the Secretary of State to set parameters for acceptable forms of photo ID, something not currently outlined in state statute. New Jerseyans, tomorrow, January 31st, you are invited to make your voices heard on S2100, a voter reenfranchisement bill that will restore voting rights to some 100,000 people in prison, on parole, or probation. This will take place at 10 a.m. in Committee Room 4 of the State House Annex in Trenton. And in Michigan, a federal judge last week blocked restrictions to early voting law and election changes that were pushed through in a lame duck session of last year. On to healthcare news. GOP lawmakers in Utah have proposed multiple bills that would prevent Proposition 13, which voters approved in November, from taking effect. The proposition would allow for Medicaid expansion. Meanwhile, in Tennessee, health officials have considered the idea of eliminating programs that pay for medication for renal failure and hemophilia patients that would affect 1,100 people in order to save $1.2 million. Also in Tennessee, House committee chairmen, in an attempt to be more opaque, are banning live streams during public hearings. And finally, on Tuesday, Congressman Ted Lieu and Senator Ed Markey announced the reintroduction of legislation to prevent the president from launching a first strike without congressional approval. Bills H.R. 669 and S. 200 have been proposed, and we, the people, should be calling our members to voice our desire to see this pass. Tomorrow night on Dansplaining, we will be discussing the Emergency Powers Act. Thank you to the Tennessean and the Denver Channel and the Maven Roundtable, also the Albany Times Union, for information used in tonight's report. For everyone here at the Blue Wave Report, I'm Dan Jennings, reminding you as always, get in there.
I can't.
Say it. Hurry.
Don't just comment, act. Have a good night, everybody. Bye.